Hello, Civic Scholars. Happy Friday. I am obviously not here. Well, I'm here. As you can see, I'm in the classroom, but I'm not there with you. So I apologize for that. So I want to thank you guys ahead of time for watching the video here and being respectful students for the substitute teacher for the hour. And hey, we're just going to go through this, a couple of different things here. If you've already opened up Google Classroom, I appreciate that because it should then also explain to you what's going to be going on throughout the hour. Basically, for right now, you need to be watching this video as it goes through. We're going to go through a couple different things. We're going to watch CNN together here first. Then we will go over that Constitution scavenger hunt. We'll look through that and go through the answers to that. From there, I've got another video clip that we're going to watch here that starts to deal with the Articles of Confederation. And then once you are done with that, as you've watched this whole video, then you can go to the sub and tell them that you are done watching the video and get one of the worksheets from them that is titled Articles of Confederation. And on that worksheet, you are to be working on that individually in your seat. If you want to pop in your earbuds and listen to some music for the rest of the hour to do that, that's great. This will be due at your next class time back for you odd students, not you odd students, but you odd day students. You will be bringing that back, and that'll be due on Monday of next week. And for you, any of you in even numbered hours, you'll be coming back and bringing that in on Tuesday of next week. And that's a paper copy that the sub can give you as soon as you're done watching this video. So without further ado, I'm going to pop open CNN 10 here, and this is yesterday's version of CNN 10, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and watch that. We haven't watched this in a while, so we got to get up to date on what's happening. It's got some stuff dealing with our economy and things like that, so it's good stuff that we would be talking about in class in either civics or econ anyway. So here we go. Come on, CNN. Give it a minute here. If it doesn't work, that's no big deal. We can keep on moving on to something else. We have to. Try it one more time as soon as this loads up. All right, everybody cross your fingers. Tell you what, I'm going to leave it on the small screen for a little bit. See if that helps. I wonder if it'll work better.
The world may be one step closer to knowing exactly where coronavirus came from.
What if I shut down some of my tabs?
Then again, it may not. And an explanation of why is our first story today. I'm Carl Azus. Glad to have you watching. In May of this year, U.S. President Joe Biden gave American intelligence officials 90 days to come up with a report on the origins of coronavirus. The big question, was it naturally transmitted from an animal to a human, or was it leaked from a Chinese laboratory into the human population? Initially, medical groups like the World Health Organization and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control said they believed the virus probably originated in bats, but then jumped to people as other viruses have done. But some members of Congress and the Trump administration called for a closer look at the lab leak theory, that the virus escaped from a Chinese research facility into the public. After the Biden administration's 90 days were up for its investigation, U.S. intelligence agencies said they still didn't have a definitive answer. They concluded that either a natural origin or a lab leak was still plausible, though they didn't think COVID was produced as a biological weapon. One thing intelligence and health officials have wanted from the get-go is more information from China. The communist country originally said its scientists didn't encounter COVID until December of 2019. A previous U.S. intelligence report said workers at a Chinese lab were getting sick and being hospitalized a month before that. China has not allowed an open investigation by international researchers like those with the World Health Organization, and even though the nation is about to provide new results from more testing, it'll be China and China alone that's doing the tests. It has no plan to allow people from other countries to participate. Scientists say that's what's needed to verify what really happened with COVID-19.
Tens of thousands of tiny blood samples taken in Wuhan in the last months of 2019 are still stored in a hospital there.
The samples from the blood bank absolutely will contain vital clues.
They could potentially be very revelatory.
This is the closest to the world we've seen of real-time samples.
The samples might reveal when, and even where, antibodies against the virus first appeared in humans in October or November 2 years ago. China says they had to be kept for legal reasons for 2 years in case of lawsuits over the blood transfusions they're from. But now that limit is almost up for the key months at the end of 2019, and a Chinese official confirmed to CNN that China is preparing to test them, echoing a promise from July when they said they would share the results.
来做好准备。目前呢。
Related institutions from the Chinese side, he says, also express that once they have the results, they will deliver them to both the Chinese and foreign expert teams. The samples come from the disposable tubes that carry donor blood into the donor bag, and are something the WHO team said earlier this year they wanted to examine.
You find the origins of the coronavirus?
They could contain vital, detailed information.
Might also help us to follow the trajectory of the spread of the virus, by tracking the individuals who may carry the virus.
And you would like to go back to find out exactly during which month this virus started to leave fingerprints in the human population in China.
10-second trivia. Which of these manufacturing fields employs the most people in the U.S.? Food, machinery, motor vehicle, or computers and electronics? Of these options, the U.S. Labor Department says food manufacturing employs the most people. According to a new report released just this week, almost 3% of the American workforce quit their jobs in August. That is a record. The U.S. Labor Department started keeping track of the quit rate in the year 2000, and this August was the first time that 4.3 million workers left their positions. They didn't all stop working entirely. Many left for new jobs, and this didn't apply evenly in all industries. The quit rate was highest in hotel and food services. Wholesale trade workers and state and local government education employees also increasingly left their jobs. Experts say this happens in part because people feel confident they can get a better job somewhere else. But it's possible that concerns about coronavirus, as cases were rising in August, also factored in, as did Americans' ongoing challenges in finding childcare. The United States currently has a major labor shortage, and it's affected several fields, from manufacturing and trucking to food service, construction, and education. America's number of job openings in July was more than 11 million. That's also a record since the year 2000, but it decreased a little in August to 10.4 million. Experts say the labor shortage contributes to rising prices, problems with the supply chain, shortages of goods, and delays with shipping. That's why some officials are advising Americans to do their Christmas and holiday shopping early, as available gifts may be limited or sold out. Of the 20,000 athletes who competed in this week's Boston Marathon, many of them had run in other marathons before, but we would bet that far fewer had finished an Ironman triathlon, which is a marathon after a 2.4-mile swim and a 112-mile bike ride, and that's all got to be done in 17 hours or less. Now, if you factor in being featured on SportsCenter and holding a Guinness World Record, you've likely whittled this field of athletes down to one, and that one is named Chris Nikic. Here is his amazing story.
Chris is changing the world.
Growing up, people treat me like different. Tell me that I can't do that or can't do this.
As he got older, he became very sedentary, and that's when we got involved in the Special Olympics triathlon, just as a way to get in shape and have some fun.
The first time he ever did a sprint with Special Olympics, he came in dead last, but you know what? Chris was happy.
We just started measuring his progress 1% at a time. In the first year and a half, he made great progress. He went from nothing to doing a sprint 14-mile triathlon. And then a year later, 140 miles and completed a full Ironman.
The goal on November 7th was to complete the full Ironman in 17 hours.
There is no roadmap with Chris. We haven't seen a Down syndrome athlete operating at the brink of human exertion.
The bike, it was the most intense thing. And I had to sit there for 8 hours, constantly, through pain.
Chris's whole life he's been told he wouldn't amount to much. I've got to get him across this finish line.
On that night, I became the first person with Down syndrome to complete Ironman. It was life-changing.
Chris Nikic can face adversity. The adversity that knocks most people out of the race under extreme conditions, with a bike crash, with ant bites, with cramping.
Now, I'm watching the ball.
The most special thing he could do is be a representative for Special Olympics and continue to inspire others around the world. And that's opening all kinds of doors for him.
I'm going to do the Boston Marathon, New York Marathon, Chicago Marathon.
Chris's training is not so he can become a better Ironman. It's so that he can really have either an independent life or a semi-independent life.
I don't quit.
Let them compete to the extent of their ability, but let's not decide what their ability is.
I don't give up.
Cool shots of big stuff getting demolished. 10 out of 10. These used to be cooling towers at a power station in the United Kingdom. Now you see them, now you don't. Here you have them, here you won't. It was a controlled implosion that brought down the remaining towers of a plant that was taken out of service 3 years ago. According to Newsweek magazine, the towers each stood 374 feet tall and contained 11,000 tons of concrete. We're just glad the demo crew was Yorkshire not to be putting anyone in danger. If you're looking to use a lot of bangers to mash down a tower, it's best to be sure there's no toad in the hole that could bubble and squeak when the fry-up comes down and threatens blood pudding. Who's hungry? Want to give a shout out to McGrath High School today, our viewers watching from Alberta, Canada. We hope all y'all come back tomorrow for more CNN 10. I'm Coral Azus.
Hey, we finally got to it, get working there. Perfect. Yeah, so some of the stuff with econ, and again, we'll talk a lot more about this second semester. We talk about like unemployment and jobs and stuff like that. It's very interesting right now. We see a lot of people, as it talked about here, quitting their jobs because they think they can get better wages or find a better job. So we see a lot of companies and stuff like that, they need people to work right now. And so the workers might have the upper hand because in order to get people to work, some employers are now having to open up their pocketbooks a little bit and pay people a little bit more. And so for the working class, that may be a good thing. Yeah, and get your Christmas shopping done now, right? For your parents and your brothers and sisters, because some of that stuff they said might not be on the shelves come Christmas time because there's not enough workers out there to get stuff made, or when it gets shipped, there aren't enough people working in like the shipping industry to get stuff to where it needs to be fast enough. So we've got some issues with our economy, but hopefully they can get some stuff figured out. Okay, next, we're going to go over that Constitution scavenger hunt. And I'm going to pull it open here. Because in the Constitution scavenger hunt that you worked on yesterday, and you could have used the Constitution, you could have used, I told you could use any resources that you wanted to. I'm going to pop open the key for that so we can go through it, make sure that you've got the right stuff on there. Here we go. Perfect. Move me out of the way a little bit. So I'm going to talk about a few of these things as we go, but not too much in depth because we will cover most of this stuff more in depth as we go through this next unit of study, talking mainly about the Constitution. So follow along, make sure you get the right stuff in here as we go. Okay, so who's the father of the Constitution? Hint, wrote the Virginia Plan. The Virginia Plan is actually one of the big compromises that is made at the Constitutional Convention among the founding fathers that were there. And it helped set up our legislative branch. And you're going to need to know about the Virginia Plan and what that was all about. And we'll talk about that later. That would be James Madison. Number 2, how many states were required to ratify the Constitution before it went into effect? Ratify basically means to pass something or to approve it or okay it. 9 of the 13 states needed to approve it. That would be, if you do the math, that's 3/4 of the states. Number 3, which were the last 2 states to ratify the Constitution, doing so after the government had already started, because already 9 of the 13 states had ratified it. They all ended up doing it, but the last 2 were North Carolina and Rhode Island. Number 4, according to Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, how are slaves to be counted in determining the number of congressional districts per state? That may seem like a lot in that question, and we'll talk a lot more about that. There's this thing called the 3/5 compromise, so another compromise that needed to be made, where the people writing the Constitution decided, okay, we are going to count every slave in the United States at the time, which was a couple million. For each one slave, a state could count that as 3/5 of a person to their total state population. Or maybe another way to look at it is for every 5 slaves a state had, they could count it as 3 people to that state's final big total population. Who has the sole power of impeachment? We've talked about impeachment a little bit, especially when we talked about presidential versus parliamentary democracy. That'd be the House of Representatives. What is the term or number of years served by a member of the House of Representatives? That's 2 years. So if you're in the House of Representatives, you get your job for 2 years before you have to run for re-election if you want it again. What is the minimum age for a representative? If you want to be in the House of Representatives, you have to be at least 25 years old. At least 25 years old. So I'm barely old enough to be in the House of Representatives. Yes. Who has the sole power to try officials who have been impeached? So remember, once someone has been impeached, that doesn't mean they lose their job. That just means they then go on trial, and that's the Senate. They are like the court. They're the jurors for the court case. Number 9, when the president is tried to impeachment, who presides over the trial? That'd be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Number 10, what is the term in years served by a senator? So if you're in the House of Representatives, your term is 2 years. If you're in the Senate, your term is 6 years before you have to run for re-election. 11, what is the minimum age for a senator? 30 years old. You have to be at least 30 to become a senator. Number 12, what is the vice president's only constitutional responsibility? And that is to break ties in the Senate. There are 100 senators, so it's possible that there is a 50-50 vote on a bill or a law or some sort of issue going on. If there's a 50-50 vote, then the vice president, according to the Constitution, comes in to make the tie-breaking 101st vote. 13, the first article of the Constitution places limits on the states. Name one. States can't make treaties with other governments from other countries. They can't coin money. They can't make their own money. And they can't tax goods entering or leaving the states. Excuse me. Which branch of government is given the constitutional responsibility for regulating trade? That'd be the legislative branch, our Congress. They are the ones that are allowed to make trade agreements and regulate trade between states or between our country and other countries. 15, name two congressional limits on the president according to the Constitution. So Congress can override a president's veto. They can approve executive appointments. So when the president chooses to appoint someone to a job, Congress has the power to approve or not approve that appointment. They have the power to declare war. The president does not have power to declare war. And the president does not have the power to ratify treaties. 16, which article of the Constitution defines the power of the president? That'd be Article 2. Article 1 actually defines all the powers and the setup of the legislative branch of Congress. Article 2 defines all the powers and the setup of how the executive branch and the president, their jobs, they're going to work. And then Article 3 sets up and talks about all the rules and regulations for our Supreme Court and our court system. 17, what is the minimum age for a president? 35 years old. You've got to be at least 35 years of age to become El Presidente. For what office mentioned in the Constitution must a person be a natural-born citizen? Again, that's the president. You have to be a natural-born citizen to be president. You have to either have been born then to a parent that was a U.S. citizen when you were born or on U.S. soil. 19, name two of the powers of the president stated in the Constitution. The president can veto a law or say no, that law doesn't work. They are commander-in-chief of our armed forces, so they make the final decisions in terms of stuff dealing with our Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, any of our military. They can appoint all these different positions. Appoint means they get to choose people for these jobs. So judges in our federal court system, ambassadors to our other countries around the world. Remember, we have an ambassador to pretty much every country that we recognize around the world. That's that government official that lives there at the U.S. Embassy, usually in that country, that can do some of our daily communication and government work with those countries. The cabinet, remember we've talked about the cabinet positions of the president, where they've got, the secretary of all those different departments. So secretary of the Treasury, secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary of State, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of all those different departments. And we'll talk a lot more about those. And they can make treaties and they can pardon people. They can let people off of the punishment for a crime that they may have committed. Which branch of the federal government is responsible for establishing lower federal courts? That'd be the legislative branch. They are in charge of setting up our court system. 21, what is the only crime defined by the Constitution? That would be treason. So lying about our country, or I guess today's age, selling atomic secrets that our country has to another country, or basically doing something against our government would be considered treason. What does the Constitution require to convict a person of that crime? 2 witnesses or a confession from that person in court. Number 23, Article 4 of the Constitution refers to full faith and credit. What does this mean? It means that states have to respect the laws of other states and their citizens. Because remember, each state can have its own set of laws as well. And if there's a dispute from what one person did in one state, maybe they flee to the other state because that state doesn't have that law. They need to make an agreement to make sure that person that broke the crime in one state is maybe punished for it or has to suffer the consequences for it. 24, when is it possible for a constitutional convention, such as the one in 1789, to occur? When 2/3 of states want to propose it and then 3/4 vote for it. We'll talk much more about that and the intricacies of that. And they usually call for a constitutional convention when they want to change or amend the Constitution. 25, can the president introduce, ratify, or veto a constitutional amendment? No, that's not something the president can do. That is something our legislative branch takes care of, Congress. How does Article 6 of the Constitution resolve possible conflicts between state and federal laws? It states that the federal law is supreme. So if there is a conflict between a state law and a federal law, the federal law must be followed. What does Article 6 say about giving religious tests to candidates for public offices? You can't do that. All right, we try to separate church from state. And when we say church, we mean religion kind of as a whole. We try to separate those two things. So they deemed it illegal or not right that someone has to pass some sort of religious test to get like a government job. 28, what are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution called? The Bill of Rights. Hopefully, in past U.S. history classes in school, you've kind of recognized that or studied the Bill of Rights a little bit. We're going to study a couple of the amendments in the Constitution in those first 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights quite extensively over the course of the next few weeks. 29, name 3 of the 5 basic rights found in the First Amendment. Well, all 5 of them right here. You have the freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of petition, and freedom of assembly, meaning to gather together. And so those are the 5 things all within the First Amendment. We'll see that with a couple of the amendments, like there's more than one thing that it states. Now, the Second Amendment, hey, the right to bear arms, that's like one thing. First Amendment, we've got 5 pieces to it. In fact, part of that, even the religious piece, has 2 pieces to it. The Fifth Amendment has a couple different things that are placed in it. So we'll look at some of those as well moving forward. 30, name 5 of the rights guaranteed to all citizens in amendments 2 through 9. Your answers, maybe. We'll talk more about that one coming up. Okay, 31. What does the 10th Amendment say about the delegation of powers to the states? The 10th Amendment says powers not delegated to the U.S. by the Constitution, like to our federal government, nor prohibited to states, are reserved for the states. Those are what we call reserved powers. So I think I mentioned it in class before. The word education or school is never once written in the Constitution. So that, because it's not defined or given as a right that the national or federal government can cover, it automatically gets covered by the states. 32, which amendment banned slavery or declared all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. to be citizens, gave African Americans the right to vote? That'd be the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment. Did those 3 things. And we'll read through those specifically to see what they say. Unfortunately, people always found ways around giving African Americans or newly freed slaves the right to vote and to do other certain things, especially in the South, which shouldn't be a surprise to us, right? So we'll talk about those. Those are, those 3 amendments kind of get lumped together, though, because they all kind of have that same topic of giving newly freed slaves the rights that all citizens should have, mainly the right to vote. 33, what is the exception to the 13th Amendment's abolition of involuntary servitude? The 13th Amendment says, like, no one can be put into involuntary servitude, slavery, forced to work, without like volunteering for it. And they said you could still do that if you were charged with a crime and the consequence or the penalty for that crime was was to not necessarily be a slave, but to be forced to do labor. 34, which amendment allowed for a federal income tax? That's the 16th Amendment. Again, that's a huge source of income for our country that we didn't have before the 16th Amendment was passed. 35, the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, passed in what year? That was 1920. It's kind of sad if you think about it. It took us that long. I mean, this is like this Constitution thing's ratified around 1790, just before that. So do the math. It took us 130 years to finally give women the full right to vote in federal elections. Now, there were many parts of the country that in local elections or state elections, women had gained the right to vote. But in terms of federal elections, it took a long, long time, almost 130 years. 36, according to the 20th Amendment, if the president dies before the beginning of his or her term, who becomes the president? The vice president does. And that took a while for that to be laid out as well. Sort of that line of succession, we call it. Where, okay, if the president is unable or dies, can't do their job anymore, who becomes president next and who steps up? What happens if the vice president then becomes unable to serve? What happens if the next person? And there's a whole line of, or a list that we'll look at of who becomes president next. If something bad happens or the person quits or resigns or is impeached and found guilty, so they can no longer serve as president. What was the subject of the only amendment passed to repeal or get rid of another amendment? That'd be the Prohibition Alcohol Amendment. The 18th Amendment is passed, which says no longer can we basically sell alcohol in the United States. Well, it actually turns out to be a bad thing. Initially, it's done because bad things were supposedly happening because of alcohol. And so our country thought if we got rid of it, we wouldn't have some of these social issues. Well, it turns out things got worse, actually, when alcohol was prohibited, was not allowed to be sold legally. And so some years later, the 21st Amendment is then put into the Constitution, which says now we can sell alcohol again. We'll get rid of the 18th Amendment. 38, the 25th Amendment says a president unable to discharge the powers of his or her office must declare this in writing to two people. Who are they? The president pro tem of the Senate, who's kind of the day-to-day operational leader of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House, who is kind of the day-to-day operational leader of the House of Representatives. The argument, anyone old enough to fight for his or her country is old enough to vote, helped lead to the passage of which amendment? That'd be the 26th Amendment, claiming, hey, if they can be in the military at the age of 18, they should be able to vote at the age of 18. What was the purpose of the 27th or most recent amendment? That was to make pay raises in Congress go into effect after Congress has to run for re-election. So people couldn't necessarily raise their own wages and automatically get paid. Like in order to raise their wages, they had to wait till they were re-elected to receive those pay increases. All right, so hopefully you got those written in. If you need to go back, go ahead and stop the video, slide back, and get that stuff all written in there. We'll talk a lot more about a lot of these things as we start to study the Constitution over the course of the next couple of weeks. So considering that, the first document that we really want to look at, though, is the Articles of Confederation. And so we are going to watch a quick clip here about the Articles of Confederation. So pay close attention, and then we've got a little bit of a worksheet to do with it.
People with ADHD save 10 hours studying with this Chrome extension. But no, by all means, go ahead.
Uh-oh. Hopefully YouTube works better than...
History lecture. In this video lecture, we're going to take a look at the essential question, why did the Articles of Confederation fail? So let's get to it. Giddy up. The Articles of Confederation were our first constitution. That's right, folks. We've had two constitutions. We're very much used to hearing the United States Constitution. Well, that puppy was written in 1787. And if you know anything about American history, the year 1776, maybe that rings a bell for you. That's the Revolutionary War and Independence. So for that 11-year period, from 1776 to 1787, the United States was run under the first Constitution.
The Articles of Confederation.
And I'd like to start with kind of like a mantra, something that if you just repeat enough, you probably will get the multiple choice right, but we're obviously going to explain it in depth. And that is, the Articles of Confederation suck because the feds were too weak. The Articles of Confederation suck because the feds were too weak, or the states were too strong. So, in order to understand what that means, we have to understand the word federalism. That's a really big word on the exam in this course. You have to know what federalism is. If you don't know what federalism is, come exam time, you probably should play sick. You should probably get like a cold or the flu. Don't go, because you need to know that word. So, federalism is our form of government, as I sneak over here for a second, right? And basically, the concept is that under colonialism, or the colonial era, the United States, the Americans, the colonists, right, really had kind of like a bad view of what government was, because of the abuses that, you know, the King of England and the English government had kind of done to the Americas. It depends on how you look at it, but no taxation without representation, and the denial of some natural rights, consent of the governed. You know, we really didn't like government. So, in the analogy that I use when I teach that
is with Ike and Tina Turner.
Tina Turner being the colonist and Ike being the abusive, you know, kind of king of England, and that eventually, what does Tina do? She grows up, right? She reads Common Sense and she decides, I'm out of here. So now that she's out of here, that's 1776, obviously she has to fight her way out of the Revolutionary War, but she has to now form a new government, right? In a sense, she has to kind of date a new guy. So it's that idea in her head about men, you know, that men are abusive or that government is abusive, that makes her come up with a form of federalism. Because you see, folks, Tina now has the power. So rather than handing all of that power over to some, you know, guy that we really don't know well, she's going to, and here we go with the definition, federalism is the division of power between the federal government, that new guy, and then some just for Tina. Tina's going to be the states in this analogy. Let me do that in one big swoosh. Federalism is the division of power between the feds and the states. So both of our constitutions have had that theory or that enaction of federalism. Today we have, you know, rather powerful federal government. And, you know, we're not going to give viewpoints here, whether it's good or bad, but throughout American history, the federal government has grown in size. And, you know, the states still retain power, marriage laws and schools and, you know, some of these issues. But the federal government is definitely the authority figure in that relationship under most aspects of what we would consider public policy. So when Tina first gets her hands on the power, she's going to form the Articles of, you said it, didn't you? The Articles of Confederation. She's going to rip it like this. Federalism is the division of power between the feds and the states. So the feds are incredibly weak, and now you know why. Tina doesn't like government. She doesn't really trust, you know, federal central authority. So the colonists, when they write the first, you know, Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution, they're going to delegate, give to the federal government very limited power. And the states, the kind of, you know, are going to be like independent nations in a sense. They're going to have all, not all of the power, but most of the power that today we find in the federal government. So let's take a look at what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Articles of Confederation. A little bit good, a little bit more bad, and a lot of ugly. Let me go see if I can go find that right now. So I found it. I found the good, I found the bad, and I found the ugly. And as we dive into that, let's just get some basic structure down. There is a federal government, you know. We said that, you know, federalism is the division of power between there is a little federal government, there's a big state governments going on, but there is a federal government, so we need to look at the structure of that federal government. Basically, there is one branch of government. Today we have three branches. We have legislative, executive, and judicial. There's only the legislative under the Articles of Confederation. There is a Congress with 13 members. Guess what the 13 members represent? Yeah, they represent the 13 states. Every state, big, small, it doesn't matter, gets an equal voice, gets one vote in that government. So that's what it looks like. So good, bad, and ugly. The good is the law. I only go over one because really there is only one fundamentally really good law for the United States government passed under the Articles, and that is the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. And I'm going to explain why I said it like that in a second. But basically what this law does is it gives the federal government the ability to grow the nation. It is a procedural law that basically sets up a formula for territories to join the United States and become states. So sometimes in class I've said it like the mama can go get pregnant law. Oh, mama can go get pregnant. Oh, Northwest Ordinance 1787. And, that's kind of a strange vocabulary word that'll pop up in the exam. And if you have a lot of facts stuffed in your head, sometimes it's hard to pull that one out. But generally, if you see that word and you say it like I said it, you'll get that pregnancy visualization in your mind. And then maybe the multiple choice will start to kind of pop out. That idea of the United States growing, of the United States being able to eventually, do manifest destiny through Louisiana Purchase and the Mexican War and all that other, stuff that comes later. So from a United States perspective, that's good. If you're a Native American or you're a Mexican, the Northwest Ordinance is probably not a good thing. But let's move on from there. Let's do the bad and the ugly. The bad is the structure itself, kind of the rules of the Articles that really are going to handicap in a sense, the ability of the United States to go forward. So here are just a few of them. Number one, there's no president. Right? If the aliens come down from outer space and say, take me to your leader, there is no leader. There's no court system. There's no ability to tax. The federal government had to ask the states for money. And in a sense, the federal government really has an empty wallet. It has a credit card with no credit on it, in a sense. There is no army. The army consisted of the national, kind of what today would be the National Guard, but the 13 states had their own military. There's no monetary system, so there's no national money. There's no ability to control interstate commerce, kind of between the states. Rhode Island, I think, had set up basically its own tax system, that if you wanted to sell goods in Rhode Island, you had to pay Rhode Island money to do that from other states. So those are some of the bad structural aspects. In terms of, passing laws, remember there were only 13 members in Congress, 13 states. You needed 9 out of 13 to pass a law. So that's what's called a supermajority. It's hard enough to get 51%, to do anything. So to get 9 out of 13 made it very difficult to pass laws. To change the Articles of Confederation. Let's say they had a realization that, oh man, that's messed up, we have to change that. You needed all 13. So that's going to be a problem. And we're going to find out, through the Annapolis Convention, that eventually we're not going to be able to get 13 to agree to change anything, which is going to ultimately destroy the Articles of Confederation. So kind of that's the good and the bad. I'm going to get pregnant, Northwest Ordinance of 1787. The inflexibility of the Articles, 9 out of 13 to pass a law, but more importantly, 13 out of 13 states to agree to change that baby, which makes it completely inflexible. You really can't, move forward and change things. And, the structural aspect itself. The idea that there's no president, there's no tax system, there's no court, there's no military, there's no paper money, is all going to make it for kind of a bad scene later on. So let me go get the ugly, and then we're going to be done. Ugly! Miss Ugly, where are you? Ah.
Fun science videos and lessons for grades K to 8. And math lessons are now available at GenerationGenius.com.
$1 million!
It's a teaching resource that has videos and lessons covering all science and math topics in grades K to 8.
All right.
Two of the North Poles together, they repel.
Learn.
Okay, so that was a little bit of an introduction into the Articles of Confederation. And it's obviously something that didn't work. They failed. And Hip Hughes there, he talks a lot about the failures of them and why they failed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we're moving forward in class. So now your job is to do this. You need to go to the sub and you need to ask them for the Articles of Confederation handout. And you need to go through individually by yourself at your seat and work your way through some of the questions on there. There's some short answer questions. There's some multiple choice questions. There's some sort of fill in the boxes with some stuff. And hey, if you just read the directions right through, you're going to be all set. It's pretty straightforward. That's your assignment for today that will be due at the next class period. Once you are all done working with that, if you do finish that up in class, then it's time to have free time. Remember, find reasonable educational entertainment. Do your best to use any and all resources you need to fill that out, whether that's the internet, whether that's this video, stuff you just learned from the video. Go back and watch the video if you want to. But you do you to make sure that gets done and completed for the next time that I see you. All right. Have at it. Enjoy. See ya. Have a great weekend.